turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wide variety. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories are talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
Good afternoon, monsters, and welcome to this week's episode of Monsters on the Edge. I am your host, Barnaby Jones. Today we are live in studio at a special and the bugs are back in the system, it appears. So apparently StreamYard has a new issue with some of the internet browsers, and the virtual background is causing problems. So we're going to turn that off for the rest of the show because I've already been booted out of here once. So hopefully if I turn the virtual background off, it will not boot me out like it did 30 times on Thursday. So let us give that a try and hope that today's show runs a little more bug-free. Welcome to the lovely green screen of doom. All right. So with that being said, let's see. Coming up, guys, this week we have. Now I got to reset my stuff because I got kicked out. There we go. All right, we are premiering again the Hairy Man of Dairyland documentary, the Bigfoot in Wisconsin. It is going to be a special presentation with the Wisconsin Bigfoot Group. It is going to be down in Campbellsport, Wisconsin at the Zillmere Shelter. If you guys want more information, head on over to wisconsincaps.com, click on the public events tab, or go to Wisconsin Bigfoot Group on Facebook and come out and join us. Then, guys, next week I'm going to be at the Cedarburg Public Library talking about UFO and UAP disclosure. That is going to be at 6 p.m. Thursday, July 17th. Next Saturday, we are going to be down in Adams, Wisconsin in a investigation with PBS Wisconsin and the Central Wisconsin CE5 group looking for UFOs, UAPs, and watching the sky. It's going to be a fun event. Head on over to Central Wisconsin CE5 on Facebook for more information, or the public events tab as well. UFO Days, Elmwood, Wisconsin, July 26th. Silcon Gaze, Illinois in September. The Van Meter Visitor Festival in September. And the Neenah Public Library in October with a special presentation on the paranormal, followed by a paranormal investigation of the library. All this, guys, coming up. And then we are head to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, April 2026. And Fond du Lac, Wisconsin in 2026 as well. So that's what we got coming up here, guys. This looks really weird with the green screen, and now I'm all thrown off. All right, guys. Without any further ado, let's get to our live guest today. All right, guys, my guest is Dennis Carroll. He has over 40 plus years of experience in the field of the paranormal. He has studied, researched, and investigated many aspects pertaining to the paranormal and the supernatural, with many personal paranormal experiences. He is also a researcher and investigator of the occult and the supernatural. Dennis is a well-known authority on folklore, legends, superstitions, cryptozoology, and the occult. He is a supernaturalist and paranormal consultant who has advised people throughout the world. Dennis is a published freelance writer, author who has written several books and is currently at work on a series of adventure novels based on supernatural events. He is an ordained minister and a photographer. He is also well known in UFO and cryptid research. He is a speaker and performs lectures and presentations on culture, folklore, myths, and legends. Please welcome to the show my guest today, Dennis Carroll. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, sir. Glad to be here. I'm a big fan of your show, actually. I'm a subscriber, so I love to watch your show a lot. So it's good to be on it.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Like I said, we were talking before the show. You have done so much from, like cryptids, paranormal, demonology, everything. I am super excited to talk to you, and I have no idea even where to start. So, like I said, we are live. If anybody that is familiar with your work or anything has any questions that's watching, throw them in the comments section, and we'll cover that stuff as well. But so we were talking a little bit starting out here, and I would like to start talking about some of the legends and that of the Dogman and werewolves. We were talking, I had Morgan Knutson on my show a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about how in Canada they had a lot more folklore and legends of the indigenous people with these Dogman creatures. But here in the US, we don't so much. So I was curious to see, do you know of a lot of like local indigenous stories or legends or anything of these creatures?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of this stuff is kind of centralized in some areas. We do know that a lot of these indigenous tribes did not get along with each other, but they did share some cultural aspects. I think I'm not going to say they had a network, but they definitely, communicated from time to time. I'm sure in personal communications and talked to each other about a lot of these things. But I think Dogman is found more towards, past the American-Canadian border up that way, a little bit more than he is known further south, definitely. But, and you've got places like the Nahanni Valley and some other stuff like that up that way that ties into a lot of this stuff. And so you've got some localized legend stuff going on. But now when it comes to Bigfoot, he's everywhere. Definitely. He is pretty well known throughout all the indigenous tribes, throughout the whole continent, actually, and into South America for that matter, not only worldwide. So, and I think this tells us that one very important aspect that cryptids like Bigfoot were definitely universal in some ways, more so than Dogman was. Although there are, we call them cinephilia, There are stories of dog-headed people supposedly in other parts of the world, but they're not like our dog man in certain ways, because our dog man is sort of very much like the werewolf. We were talking about that earlier. There's I think, a lot of misidentification going on here with some of this stuff. I think what we see sometimes and think is the dog man may very well be a werewolf. Well, the interesting thing about the werewolf, and we got to remember this, there are different kinds of werewolves, by the way, and I've hunted a few different ones myself and know. The interesting thing about the real true werewolf is it can run on all fours. It's like a big giant monster, dire wolf kind of a thing when he wants. But it can stand up and walk on two legs when he wants to as well. But now Dogman, most of the time, is seen walking on two legs. So there's a little bit of a difference in that. And I think there's a difference in the ears. But like I said earlier, you just don't walk up and ask for a card and say, oh, you're a dog man or a werewolf kind of thing. You kind of figure out what you're dealing with here. The indigenous peoples were very much like that too. I think they said, oh, that thing, it's just like, I think it was the Sioux tribe, didn't have a word for a horse. So they called a horse a big dog. That was the name that they gave it. And that was the only thing they could equate with. You got to remember that ancient peoples, when they saw something they couldn't explain, they had to reference it to what they knew existed. We do the same thing today, although we're coming from a completely different direction, but we do that too. And so if they said they saw something that looked like a man walking around, they would think that was sort of like a dog and a dog man. Okay, that's the way they would probably describe something like that. But to them, a wolf was a wolf. It usually walked around on four legs. So you got two different. So they knew the difference in these things because the indigenous people had dogs for thousands of years. They hunted with them. They were companions with them, and all, just like we have our dogs today. They had certain dog breeds too. By the way, some of them are still in existence. Some of them died out, unfortunately, but some of them are still around. But they knew dogs, okay, without doubt, so they would not, so you can't say an indigenous fellow, would misconstrue that as being something other than a dog, the way it looked to him. It didn't look like that much like a wolf because it didn't walk like a wolf, and didn't have the attributes of a wolf. And here's something I've always found interesting, as I've studied a lot of folklore over the years. And the fact is, indigenous peoples knew that something was completely out of the ordinary. When they saw Dogman, just like Bigfoot, they knew this was not something that was, the average thing like a fox or, a mountain lion or something. They knew this was something out of the ordinary. Okay, they knew that. So they had a lot of stories where they tell of these beings as supernatural, almost in the way that they did move things and did things. But here's the thing they said about wolves. They knew wolves. They knew them well. They lived with them. Okay. And they knew them. And they said that the wolf was a tribe. They call them a tribe because the wolf is like a family. It is a family unit in many ways. And they understood that, So they knew a lot about what they were dealing with. And we got to understand their intelligence in this and what they were seeing and what they, how they equated to it. But that's the interesting part to me. Is they knew this was something out of the ordinary, and they talked about it, but they didn't talk a whole lot about it because, like the Skinwalker, you didn't talk about stuff like this much. If you and I had been indigenous people, we wouldn't stand on the corner somewhere talking about this most of the time. This was something taboo. We didn't, because we were afraid if we talked about it, it might come looking for us that night. There was a good possibility of that happening. So they didn't talk about that, just like the Skinwalker and even Bigfoot. They didn't even talk. They knew it was there. They recognized its existence, but didn't want to give it any, I want to say, power in their lives to that certain extent. They didn't want to give it that much attention, but they knew it was there. And, I live in the Appalachian Mountains, on the very edge of the Appalachian Mountains, and, we have rules there. I know you've heard of the rules. And one of them is, if you see something, don't talk about it. And that comes back from definitely the indigenous tribe influence there. You just don't talk about it because these people believed, Barnaby, that to talk about something gave it power. You empowered it when you talked about it. And And they had a way of doing things. Like I say, if I were an indigenous person, I would say, I'm going to the lake to fish. And that's all I would tell you. I wouldn't give you a detailed account of what I was going to do or when I was going to do it. They were very secretive in some ways, the way they did things, because they believed there were certain things out there listening, certain spirits that could really mess with them, if they told stuff. So they were very careful about things that got their attention or things that they talked about. And they were just, but of course there was another part of their culture that was very important, the storytelling part, where they passed down the legends and stories from generation to generation, because they didn't write anything down. I think the Cherokees were the first one that actually came up with an alphabet and began to write things down. Up until then, it was word of mouth thing. So that's the only time, most of the time, they would talk about something like this when they were telling the story of it or mentioned it in the story. But definitely, I think without a doubt that some of these things, especially like Dogman, I have studied a lot, done a lot of research on Dogman. He was kind of localized in many aspects. I'm not going to say a very tight locality, but it was kind of broad, but not as broad as Bigfoot, not as far-reaching and ranging as that.
Interesting. Do you find a lot more like stuff in Louisiana area? Because like I heard that, because of the French Canadians and stuff had also settled Louisiana, and you have the Rougarou and the Loup-garou and stuff like that. So it kind of make more sense like the people would have it down there.
Yeah, well, now you got to remember the Loup-garou and the Rougarou are slightly different, okay? The Loup-garou is basically just a French version of the werewolf, okay? That's what it means, Loup-garou. The Rougarou, on the other hand, I'm not going to say it's got the same attributes, but it's kind of like a little bit like the Wendigo. It's a spiritual thing more so than a physical thing, although it can possess you. It can take over you, but it was very directly connected to Catholic religion and belief systems down there in that part of the state. And if you were like a bad Catholic or you violated Lent and did things you wasn't supposed to do, you could possibly be taken by the Rougarou. And you could be possessed for like 100 days, I think, or something like that. And then it would pass on to someone else. But you did bad things to get that. In other words, you were kind of an evil person. You were asking for this, okay? That's the way they looked at it. But now the Loup-garou is more like the werewolf. And there are many different types of the werewolves. You've got cursed werewolves or like I call wolfmen, actually. They don't really transform completely all the way into what you would call an actual werewolf, because an actual werewolf is a monster. It can stand up on two legs. It is an apex killer. It is a psychotic killer. Once it gets your scent, and I mean that literally, once it gets your scent and gets on your trail, it hardly ever will stop until it unalives you and tears you to pieces and eats you. By the way, it will eat some of you. That's sort of its ultimate triumph, is to eat its prey. It may not necessarily be hungry, but it just does that as sort of the last insult, you might say, in that respect. But that's the werewolf. But there are many different kinds. There can be the cursed kind. The werewolf is brought about by belief in dark black magic, evil magic. You put on a wolf pelt, you do the incantations, you do the sacrifices, you do what needs to be done. And I've had people come up and ask me that, how can I become a werewolf? I said, you don't want to go there. You do not want to go there because you don't understand what this stuff requires. This is total, complete darkness that eats you up alive, and it requires a price that you probably don't really want to pay, without doubt. And it's very horrific transformation. It hurts. It is very painful to do this. And here's the kickback on that. The more you transform, the harder it gets to go back to your original form. Eventually, one day, you won't be able to go back. You will be stuck forever in the form of the werewolf. That's usually part of the curse of this thing. But now there are cursed bloodlines in which this werewolfery, this lycanthropy is found. And you can be a victim of this and not want to be, not like the regular werewolf you want to take on and do the incantations and stuff. You don't want to be this way. This is very sad in many ways, because you don't want to go out killing people. You want to. It is the werewolf, but it's not quite the full-blown version of the werewolf, but it's just as dangerous. It can get people just as bad. I mean, it has the body of the beast, but the mind of the man, and that's what makes it so very dangerous. That's what makes this one of the most dangerous monsters of all, because it can think you just like you do. It can outthink you sometimes, because it's dealing off of not just human brain thought, but also instinct that it's living off of as well. So this is a very dangerous creature, definitely. And like I said, there aren't that many werewolf reports because not that many people live to tell about them. That's just the way the werewolf works. But there can be also a bloodline of people that want to change like that. They have embraced the curse. Because they are evil people, it gives them more power. They'll go along with it. So there are many different types of werewolves that you're dealing with here, and you got to understand that's where they come from. And like I say, the interesting thing about the werewolf, he can be your next door neighbor. You're a Sunday school teacher, and you never know it unless you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they can transform at any time. It doesn't have to be a full moon. That's kind of Hollywood stuff there. Although the full moon gives them more power, they don't have to have that to transform. They can transform at any time, especially unless they're living under the curse, which is a different thing. But if they want to become a werewolf, they can do that anytime they want. Okay, they can do broad daylight. But the interesting thing is, the difference in the werewolf and the dogman is, like I said earlier, the dogman is dogman 24/7. He doesn't change. He stays in that form all the time. He is more like an animal in that respect. Although he may have very much like the mind of a man, he has also got that mind of an animal. He's got that instinct of the animal. So he's more animal than the werewolf is in many aspects. Although the werewolf has the body of the beast, but the mind of the man. So that's where you get in the dangerous territory of dealing with these two kind of cryptids. What you're dealing with is definitely can unalive you in a hurry. Either way, I wouldn't want to mess with either one of them. But like I said, dogman might cut you a break. The werewolf never would. He's going to do what he's going to do to you. And here's the interesting thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Hounds of God. But the Hounds of God is supposed to be a secret sect of the Catholic Church that their priests turn into werewolves and actually go out and assassinate people for the church or do certain things for the church to get rid of people or whatever. So could you imagine the perfect assassin would be to send a werewolf after somebody? He's probably going to get the job done, definitely. That's the way that would work. But I don't go along with that too much. No one said, "Do you think?" I said, "Well, if that is true, if there really do exist the Hounds of God, they're doing evil. They're doing evil no matter what kind of tag you hang on it. It's still the darkness. You cannot do good with evil or evil with good. It just don't usually work out that way. But there have been instances, in the past. I think Peter Stubb was one that claimed to go out and, kind of work for the church a little bit as a werewolf. So there have been claims of that down through them. But whether they were just saying that so they wouldn't get, burned at the stake or what, we got to wonder about that. But you have to. I've heard rumors that supposedly the Hounds of God do exist, but it's a very ultra secret sect within the church itself. And like even the Pope doesn't know they exist, supposedly, or whatever. But that's an interesting thought. Werewolf assassins. That sounds like some of a video game, but that is a definite weird thing with the werewolf. But here's this makes werewolf kind of my favorite cryptid in some ways. Okay, he's bigger than life and goes even beyond a force of nature in some ways. But he's very dark, very evil, very dark, very supernatural. Whereas in the Dogman would be more natural in some ways. Although I'm not going to say he doesn't have. I've got a lot of reports on record, Barnaby, of people actually. I think the Dogman. I'm going to say this. I'm going to go all in with this. The Dogman, in some instances, may be something conjured up from the darkness. It may be some kind of thing that's brought forth for certain reasons. And the reason I say this, there are some definite dark ties with Dogman that should not be there if he was just an animal, like Bigfoot, And the Bigfoot I ran into was just gone. And I, to this day, have not figured out how he disappeared in front of me the way he did. And there was no way it could have got away from me. I mean, I was close enough to reach out and pull his ear if I wanted to. I mean, I was that close to him. I could smell him and feel the body heat off of him. But he stepped behind a tree and was just not there anymore. And there was no way. I was on that tree like white on rice, okay? I was on that, and there's no way he could have got away from me. With humanly possible, I say that I would know of, that he could have got away. So where did he go? That's the big question. Are these things like Dogman and Bigfoot, do they have a spiritual side to them of some sort? Or are they actually utilizing portals of some sort or something? You got to wonder about that. But a lot of my research has led me to believe that there may be a definite portal factor involved in some of this stuff. And that would go a long way to explain a lot of things in the paranormal and the supernatural.
Interesting. That is a lot of information here. Let's back up here. And you did mention the Cenophilia, or the Cenophiles. Oh my gosh, whatever those guys. The dog-headed people. How do they figure into all this? Because they're not necessarily, they're a person with the head of a dog, right? So they're not a werewolf or a dog man.
It's a possibility, that these people are described as being tribes of people, like races of people. I think Alexander the Great, some of his men supposedly ran into these tribes in the mountains and hills of India. The Greeks supposedly had interaction with some of these guys as well on different places. I have to wonder about that because, there are a lot of cryptids reported back in ancient times, like the Blemmies, they had the face and the stomach and all this stuff. You had some really weird crap going on out there with that stuff. And I have to wonder about that. But, and I've formulated a lot of thoughts about that over the years. And a lot of this, I think, leads back to one word, Nephilim. I think this may be a broad term for that. I'm not going to get into that now. That's a story for another time. But I think there may be a relation to that. And if we believe what we think is correct in this hypothesis, certain forces on this planet hibernize certain beings. That's where you get like the mermaids, and you read all this in the Book of Enoch and stuff like that. You got mermaids, you got different hybrids of things. And that might be the actual reasons for this kind of thing. Just think a perfect hybrid would be a dog and a person, if you turn out to have a body of a human and the head of a dog. That's hybridization no matter which way you look at it. And we blame the government nowadays for a lot of that kind of stuff. And I don't doubt that they're not involved in that. Not without a doubt in my book. I've actually I had the CIA try to recruit me one time. Okay. They wanted people with talents along those lines with stuff. And to me, the interesting thing about all this, though, I think there are other forces that have really screwed around with the nature of this planet, the creation of this planet in some aspects. It would not surprise me, albeit that there was. And if you hibernize people like that, they will go on and propagate and have their own tribe, their own little race of people like doing this with the heads of dogs. And there have been some very famous figures. I think St. Francis was one of them. Supposedly had the dog head, wasn't it? I think it was St. Francis. Anyway, one of them, I can't remember now. Anyway, he supposedly had dog head. And I think one time the St. Patrick was described as having the head of a dog one time as well. You had a very interesting tie-in with this, and it could be that the church knew about some of this stuff and suppressed it and tried to keep it down. These people may have eventually died out in these areas, and they are no longer there. Okay. We don't know a whole lot. There's a lot of mystery to history, okay, that we don't know about that went on in that time. That's just like Alexander the Great's men encountering dragons in caves in India. They talked about a lot of different things. And here's what really gets me about this, Barnaby. They so matter of fact about it, as if it's nothing really extraordinary to them. And that kind of makes me wonder, maybe, they had some firsthand knowledge definitely here of running into these things. Just like when I first started out in the paranormal, many years ago, I had a list. And on that list, this list could be found all over the world. This is what really struck. One of the very first things that really jumped out at me about the paranormal and the supernatural. On this list were vampires, werewolves, dragons, giants. The list went on, and everywhere, every culture had this stuff. They talked about them. They knew about them. That includes indigenous peoples. The Cherokee believes in dragons, by the way. Okay. Why is that? We got to ask that very important question. Why is that? Maybe because they interacted with it. They knew about it. That's just like, without a doubt, I do not believe somebody flipped the switch and all the dinosaurs died out in one day. I don't believe that happened. And I believe they may have been some existent in some areas and still may be to this day out there somewhere. They didn't all die out. That's that's not that far-fetched to me. And that's where you get dragons from. By the way, the word dinosaur was invented in 1850. Before that, everybody called them dragons.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point. I do presentations on cryptozoology and stuff, and in that I talk about, in all these ancient stories about dragons, what happened to them? They sent a knight out and they killed it. So why don't we have dragons today? Well, because all the ones that we did find and we did see, they sent someone out to kill. So obviously this is why we don't still have, hordes of dragons running around and terrorizing everyone, because they've killed them all off. Same as all your other ones that you've talked about, like the hybrids and stuff, your minotaurs and your centaurs and all these weird hybrid creatures that were around in Greek and, mythology and stuff like that. They killed them all off. Every time they ran into something strange, they sent somebody out to kill it,
Absolutely. When you look at hybridization like this, it does not occur naturally in nature most of the time. Somebody's manipulating something here. That's what you got to say about it. Definitely. I'm a great believer in if it, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it probably is a duck, And it's kind of hard to get around some of this stuff without saying there's definitely some kind of intelligent manipulation behind some of this stuff. Absolutely. But science, by the way, the science that we have today, it wears blinders. You ever seen a horse with blinders on? You can only see one certain straight ahead, and that's it, a certain way. And science does that to itself. It should not do that. Science should never wear blinders on anything, but they do. Because a lot of their grant money is on the line. Okay, that's what it all comes down to, the money. Yeah. But I think a lot of instances where giants have been found and stuff like that, the bones have been found, the skulls, and why do they conveniently disappear like they supposedly do? For a reason. Science has said it's this way. We bank our reputations on it, and we're not going to be proved wrong, no matter what. No matter what you find, we're not going to be proved wrong. That's the way they look at it many times. That's not real true science. Science should be asking questions and exploring things and other ideas, but that, unfortunately, that's the way we got stuck with science. But the whole thing of the matter is, there's definitely something going on that tells us in folklore and legend that some of this stuff that these men and women talk about meeting and things that they knew about may have been very true, very real to them. And we're not just talking about stories here. We're not talking about, kids being scared at bedtime with this kind of stuff. They were sitting around and actually believed this stuff because a lot of them actually saw these things. And here's the interesting thing. You brought up a good point. Whenever they talked about dragons, it was always dragons getting killed. Eventually, maybe they wiped most of them out by doing that, okay? They unalived a lot of dragons. Of course, there could have been some and still to this day may exist. I don't know. I'm not going to say they're not. Because dragons had a very interesting connection. They like caves. And that would be the perfect hiding place when you think about it, okay? If I were going to go hide, I'd go to the cave systems. And that would be the perfect place for dragons to hide. But you still got the remnant of dragons with us, definitely. Look at alligators and crocodiles. They walked at the feet of dinosaurs. Look at the Komodo dragon. I would not want one in my yard, thank you. He would eat your dog. He'd eat your family, okay? That's going to be, it's going to work for me as a dinosaur till the real thing comes along, definitely. So you've got a lot of remnants of these things, and you got to look at it and say, well, it didn't die out. Maybe the dinosaurs didn't, like we think they did.
That's interesting, though. What are your thoughts on this? I just had Darren Niche on my show, and he was talking about our modern understanding of these dinosaurs, that a lot of the flying ones at least had feathers and not necessarily like the leathery bat wings and stuff like people are describing, like you see in Jurassic Park movies and so on. So when people are describing these leathery reptilian scaled dinosaurs that they're seeing in modern times, this isn't what dinosaurs would have actually looked like in the past. So what are people seeing if they're not really dinosaurs? Does that make sense?
Well, when you think of the dynamics of flight, okay, what are feathers for? Feathers give you more lift. They give you more streamlined thing and all that stuff. It would not be that far-fetched that some of these things might not have had feathers, or maybe not have been completely covered with them, but may have had a few on them, definitely for flight purposes. You take the thing like pterodactyls and stuff like that. Here's the thing about dinosaurs. A lot of people don't understand this, Barnaby, but the 99% of the dinosaurs you see in museums are not the real thing. They're reconstructions. Okay, folks, I hate to tell you this, that burst your bubble, but we don't really know what they truly looked like in many aspects. We're only guessing. We're just putting meat on bones, and we don't really know what that meat was, okay? Mm-hmm. It could have had feathers. Some of them could have had feathers, definitely. And they could have lost their feathers before they became fossils that we find. It's not that far-fetched, definitely not. But we don't know what their true appearances. We can only surmise what their true appearances were. And most of the time, we don't even get the full set of bones. Mm-hmm. So we have to, recreate, maybe this, it's like a puzzle. You put the puzzle here, you put the piece there, and you got to hope it connects. A lot of that is, I call that supposition science, okay? They're supposing a whole lot. It may not be true. That's just the way that goes. So until somebody comes up and says, hey, Barnaby, I saw this dinosaur, and I can tell you exactly what it looks like, then we got an eyewitness to it. We can go with that, definitely. That's one thing I said, in my career, it's been well over half a century now. I have done tons on tons of different eyewitness sightings. Okay, I know how to decipher these things and I can tell pretty much when somebody's telling a lie and when somebody's actually giving a factual account of something. And being ex-law enforcement, I learned a lot of investigative techniques that I put into this and to understand these things. And it's all in how you interview people, and you can tell when somebody's being honest with you. But here's the thing about it. That's why I tell a lot of people, if you were to come to me tomorrow and say, Dennis, I saw something, whatever it may be, I saw a pukwudgie, okay, and I would tell you immediately, Barnaby, you need to write down every bit of that, everything. I don't care what time of day it was. I don't care what you had for dinner. Put that in the report, okay? Everything knows this, because you got to remember this. Your mind will play some tricks on you as time goes on. You will lose a lot of valuable information if you're not careful, and your brain's funny this way. It may try to put other info in there that's not necessarily right. So it's very important that we make a complete record of what we encounter. And here's another thing. When you see something that scares the you-know-what out of you, most of the time it looks a whole lot bigger to you than it really is. That's your brain doing that. It's like it's magnifying it, I've had a lot of people tell me that too. Well, it was 10 feet tall. I said, well, now on second thought, maybe, come on now, was it really that tall? Or you just think it was? And finally, they usually revise themselves a little bit on that. Well, maybe it was 8 foot. I don't know. It just looked that big to me. It scares them. It's going to seem a lot bigger. It's going to be intimidating too, by the way. It's going to be very intimidating, and that's another factor on that. So it's why it's very important that we get the correct information down to really get the picture of what it is we need to be looking at. And that's where the eyewitness thing comes in. And what we're doing and I've said this before, being a writer, you need to crawl inside of people's head and see stuff with their eyes to truly understand what it was they were experiencing. Okay. Then you get a better handle on it. But that's the way you got to look at it. That's the way you got to investigate it. That's what the word investigation simply means. You got to look deeper into it and try to figure out what's going on. But that happened. Well, that's being human. We tend to, exaggerate things that scare us, pretty much so, because they seem bigger than life to us. They seem more intimidating. But like the Bigfoot I saw, when I went back and measured, I would have said, to me at that time, he was a lot bigger. But when I went back and measured how tall he was compared to that tree, he was a little bit over 8 foot. Okay. But at the time, thinking back on it, I said, God, it seemed like he was bigger than that to me, because, it was the shock of the moment. I wasn't scared. A lot of people say, why didn't you run? I said, no, I was running to him. I wasn't running away from him. I wanted to see more. But it's that shock of the moment. Can kind of change your perspective and your perception of things if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We are live for anybody that is just tuning in or joining us here. If you have any questions about anything for my guest here today, throw them in the comments section and we will get to them as soon as we can. It doesn't have to be necessarily on topic, but whatever you guys are interested in, we can try and cover it and get some thoughts as well. I wanted to ask you, and forgive me if I'm wrong on this, I think it's the Hopi people that were saved by what they described as like the ant people. Is that right? Okay. Yeah. So I had mentioned that I just listened to one of your other interviews with Jessica Jones, and you were talking about the Moon-Eyed people and stuff. And it got me kind of wondering, do you think that you had mentioned a little bit about how you thought that the Moon-Eyed people were living underground and had been here for a very long time before like the indigenous people and stuff. Is there any kind of thought about, like the Hopi were supposed to have been taken underground by these ant people to save them from catastrophe or what have you and stuff? Do you think that may have something to do, like these were the Hopi people had evolved into this, or do you think there's any connection at all there?
Well, yeah, and when it comes to the, and there are many indigenous people stories of small people, or what we would call, I guess, small people. They were, maybe a foot high. I don't know, they were bigger than that. They were like maybe 3-4 foot tall, 5 foot at the most. But to them, they appeared to be smaller. But the reason we call them the Moon-Eyed people is that the Cherokees and the Creek, I think it was, and some of the Kadabas talked about them as being pale people that came out only at night because the sun hurt their eyes. That's why they call them Moon-Eyed people. Their eyes do not glow or anything. You don't have human beings do not have eye shine, folks. If it has eye shine, it ain't human. Okay, but they were very eye sensitive, and I think that was caused by them living underground. Definitely. I mean, that makes sense when you think about it. If you live underground, you're going to be pale. You're going to be, light sensitive, definitely. And I think the ant people were the same way. And we got to remember something about like the Hopi people and some of these other tribes. Like I said about the wolves, they talked about what they were familiar with. And these ant people did not actually look like ants, okay? Although they're after a while, legend builds up over things, even with the indigenous people. They had legends. And when you investigate legends, you got to remember, you got to cut through the fat of the legend to get to the bone of the truth. My favorite quote of all time is this one. I love this quote. Every myth and legend known to mankind is not without its authentic foundation. Herbert Spencer said that, very brilliant man, and I agree 110% with that. And so it goes with the indigenous peoples. You got to cut through the fat of the legend to get to the grist of the bone. And I think the ant people may have been a people, and indigenous type people that lived underground. And because they lived underground, they associated them with ants. They knew all about ants, The Bible says that the ants are a nation, They make war. They take prisoners. the indigenous peoples knew all about ants, and so they kind of equated these people with them. Same thing with the Moon-eyed people. I think the Apaches have another one too. By the way, I can't think of the name of it. This is very prevalent in the southeast and southwestern part of the country, by the way. And but some northern tribes talk about these as well. But they actually supposedly helped the indigenous peoples. I think also against some of the red-haired giants, supposedly that were in Lovelock Cave and all that. They supposedly helped with some of that as well. It could be they were sort of like saviors that came out and helped them. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's a very similar legend on the California coast of something very along these same lines, where some people came from underground to help them. So what's the big picture on this? Let's look at this a moment. What they're trying to tell us is there was a civilization underground. There was a tribes or people that lived actually underground. And you find this all over the world, by the way. And I have said, like I said earlier about the dragons, what's the perfect hiding place, folks? You can't breathe under the lake, but you certainly could live in a cave system. Okay, you could do it. And that may be where some of these people existed. And because they did it for two reasons. One, because they wanted to distance themselves from the people on the above ground, because probably for different purposes, either religious or whatever. But in other words, it was an act of survival on their part. They went underground to survive against some of these other tribes. It may have been hostile with them at that certain point, But if they came out and actually helped these people like they talk about, which they were the heroes of the story, and eventually it says these ant people died out. They were no more, supposedly. That's the clue. And that's the thing about folklore, legends, and myth. You got to look for the clues that point you to different directions. And I think what they're trying to tell us here is, yes, they may have been an underground civilization at one time. And you hear about this all over the world, okay? That there were people. I mean, you hear about this myth in Ireland, okay? You hear about this. And here's an interesting tie-in. Here's something that you might wrap your mind around. What if some of these people came from somewhere else, and in order to survive, they went underground? Could they have come from someplace like maybe Egypt or Atlantis? You gotta wonder,
Interesting. So do you think that they, like I said, do you think that the Hopi or the people that were taken underground eventually evolved to the Moon-eyed people? Do you think there's a connection between those two, or do you think those are completely different?
I don't know. It's interesting. I've thought about that. But being they were kind of different cultures from each other, and there was sort of a little bit, we got to think about this, 3, 4, 5, 6, 800 miles ain't that much to us anymore. We can do it in a day or so. That was forever to those people. Okay, you didn't walk that far. You didn't move that far from where you were. So that's like I said about the Dogman. These were so centralized and localized places. They didn't get out that much. Maybe they went on hunting parties and all that. But it's very hard to say. There could have been some interaction. This is not that far-fetched. They couldn't have had interaction with each other and told each other some of these stories. But I think these came from two different directions. Now, it may be a slight connection, but like I said, these could be the same people. They just described in different ways, So the Hopi could say, oh, they look like ants to us, or the allies. Think about Greek legend. Okay, Achilles' men were called myrmidons. You know what that means? That word is ants. They were ants. Okay, they acted like ants. Whereas they were warriors that fought like that. That's the way the Greeks described them. Okay, so it wouldn't be that far-fetched for the Hopi to do that, or the Moon-eyed people, because they only came out at night. These guys are strange. They come out only at night when we're out in the daytime and the nighttime. It was kind of really interesting to them, but it's a possibility they could have been, they could have been connected. It's not that far-fetched, but like I said, the stories they told about them were completely different in many ways. But they might have been talking about the same people. It's a possibility.
It kind of reminds me of, is it in the Time Machine? They talk about, is it the Morlocks that only come out at night? Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe possibly kind of based on some of that folklore there.
Well, the Morlocks are very much like the giants, the red-haired giants. They ate people, okay? I don't know if you ever seen that. What's that Kurt Russell movie, Bone Tomahawk? You ever seen that? That's an interesting movie. It takes place in the Old West, but they run into a tribe of cannibals out in the desert, and they unalive a lot and put them in cages and eat them. Okay, this has been talked about by a lot of the indigenous tribes. That was a big taboo. As a matter of fact, I did the show with Jessica today about cannibalism. That was a big taboo everywhere. You just don't eat your neighbor. That was the big no-no. You didn't do that. And these redhead giants did that. And some of these other people they talked about were cannibals. They didn't like that. That's why they wanted to get rid of them. You don't, it's one thing for you to, steal our hunting land, maybe, but another thing to eat us. That's no good, So that's why they, had that about the giants. And here's the interesting thing about the redhead giants. I'll throw this at you, too. They're found not just in the Southwest, they're everywhere in the world. They talk about these giants having red hair. Remember the Kandahar giant thing?
Mm-hmm.
The list goes on and on. What's going on with the red hair? And by the way, the Norse said that people with red hair were what? Titans. Uh-huh. And so did the Greeks. They were very set of different castes of people here. Was it just because they were unusual because they had red hair, or was there something else going on with that? You got to wonder. But the interesting thing about all this is you got to remember, you got to try to see this through the filter of the people that lived there at that time and see how they thought about it and what they were looking at. And if this were a tribe of peoples that lived underground, that's fascinating to me because, and then you've even got legends like this up towards Canada. You've got legends in California of this. The list goes on and on, where these underground people supposedly lived all over the world. And like I said earlier, that's the perfect hiding place. If I were going to get away from humanity, that's where I'd go. Absolutely. Even if you're not a dragon, that would be a perfect place to go. So, it's not that far-fetched. That could be. And, there's so many legends and stories down through time, all over the European legends and everything, of underground kingdoms. Look at the fairies, the Sealy courts or underground. He keeps all these clues keep pointing back underground, and we have said that over the time that maybe if there was a remnant of some of these lost lands like the Lemuria or Mu or Atlantis, those people would have probably gone underground to survive from the hostile indigenous tribes that may have already been in place. We do know this, Barnaby. There were people here on this continent long before the indigenous people showed up. Mm-hmm. Who were they? And what were they? Maybe they were very warlike giants or something. We don't know. It's a possibility.
I was really interested. There was I had somebody from Europe on over here, and we were talking about before the modern England that we know kind of uprose and stuff. Did they have what were the indigenous tribes over there?
Well, you had you had the Cassians in Ireland. You had some of the earlier Britton tribes in the UK. You had waves of invaders from different places over time. You had the Saxons and you had the Britons. You had different ones, and every time somebody would come through, that wave would wipe out the first wave before, and that's the way it went. But the legends remain. The stories say, hey, we wiped these guys out, and maybe they're still underground. Maybe they're what we call fairies now, or whatever the situation was. They still remain in the folklore of these places. Very much like the Tuatha that you hear about in Ireland. The Tuatha are very strange. I think if I was going to pick anybody being as refugees of Atlantis, it'd be those guys. Because they had magic and all that. And that technology they had would have appeared to ancient peoples as magic. But it may have been some, a better technology, for all we know. Who knows how many times civilizations have risen and fallen, on this planet that we don't know about, and in the technologies they may have had, And I've speculated on this before that a lot of these UFOs that we see may not be coming from interstellar space. They may be coming from right underneath us, for all we know. Or either that or they could be time machines of some sort. We don't know. But if you were going to travel through interstellar space, you don't use a ship. That's stupid. That's the stupid way to do it. You would do portals and wormholes. That's how you would travel. The vast distances of space can be conquered by portals. Absolutely. Or you would have a technology of teleportation that would be the speed of faster than light. What is the speed faster than light? Thought. You could think yourself one place to another. You'd be the fastest thing in this universe, my friend. If you could do that, that would seem like, if you saw somebody do something like that, you would say, oh, that's a magic god right there, They can do something. That's magic. And that's what I think a lot of the ancient people saw some of this technology and said, oh, that's magic. These guys, leave them alone. Don't mess with them. They're magic people. They might do you in if you mess with them, And here's the interesting thing, and another thing I've studied over the years, I've done a lot of so-called alien abduction cases. You had the same thing going on in the Middle Ages with fairies. Same thing. Where's this coming from? You know what I'm saying? You got to wonder about that. What is the connection? It's like I was telling a friend of mine the other day. Somebody asked me this, that after all the time that you've been in the paranormal, supernatural, all this stuff, what's your one conclusion on all this? I said, well, I cannot give you that, but I can tell you one thing. I do know one thing without a doubt. Some weird way, it's all connected.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point with the fairies and the UFOs and stuff. I mean, like, look at even the abduction cases, like you said, and then the changeling babies that the fairies used to leave behind is very reminiscent of the alien abductions of taking the babies now. That you have these stories don't go away, they just modernize with the way that we look at things and see, like a lot of your UFOs and stuff. You watch throughout time how those have changed from airships and the zeppelins or hot air balloons, and then they moved forward to the saucers and now the triangles, and now it's all about these orbs or the tic-tac shaped objects and stuff. So it's the same stories, and they just kind of modernize with our inception.
Absolutely. I had one of those triangles fly right directly over my head. Okay. I know they exist down here, and it was huge. I mean, the size of a football field, and absolutely was silent. I have seen everything that flies, and everything that flies makes a noise. This thing did not. To this day, I cannot tell you. I've had a lot of people ask me over the years, what was it? Was it alien? Why? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. But it just didn't look like it belonged here. It definitely didn't that. Whatever it was. If we've got that kind of military stuff, we could take over the world tomorrow. Nobody could stand in our way. We could do it. I just don't know. But anyway, there's a lot of questions to that. I know what I saw. It's like an old man that once told me, I know what I saw and I saw what I saw, Okay, that's it. I don't have a lot of explanations for it. I can't tell you for sure, but I just know what he did. And it came out of nowhere for something. And it was the aftermath on what happened afterwards that really screwed around with me. And it was like I was living the Mothman prophecies. I had all kind of weird stuff. I follow to this day every once in a while. I have government cars shadow me. I don't know what the heck happened with that, but it wasn't good. I don't like that. I'm trying to be paranoid, but it will make you that way if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
But it was almost as sometimes you get singled out by these things to get picked on, as we say in the South, somebody picking on you all the time. But it's weird stuff. There's a lot of weird stuff going on there, but I think without a doubt, if you're going to have a connection with that, UFOs and stuff like that, I think there may be certain forces on this planet that have made certain deals with other sources that are causing a lot of this stuff. And like I say, I had the CIA approach me years ago, and The reason he got in contact with me, he asked me a bunch of demonological questions, questions on demonology. And I'm sitting there wondering, here's this guy from the government wanting to know about demons? What's wrong with this, Fisher? This does not make me feel good. Why do you need to? I started to ask him that, but I figured I wouldn't hedge my bet on that. Well, why are you asking me this? And he said, I just, I was asking a few things like this, and I said, okay, so here's something he said interesting at the end of the interview. He said, would you like to, be a consultant for us? Would you like to work with us? And I said, well, I said no, because I know usually the only way out of the CIA is through the morgue, But I said, no, really, I'm busy right now. I've got a lot going on, a lot of stuff. He said, well, we're looking for people like you. People who have supernatural talents. And if that's true, my friend, we may be in a lot of trouble, because if they are messing around, the things that I know they could be messing around with does not make me rest easy enough.
There's so many. I mean, that's another whole episode with all the stuff of the things that they've done. I mean, just the stuff that they've released. We know that they've done stuff with remote viewing. We know that they've done stuff with telekinesis and all that stuff, and sound control, and and that's the stuff that they've publicly released and said, yes, we've done this.
Let me tell you this: since you brought remote viewing up, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have to think about this. There is, without a doubt, they have employed people to guard stuff with remote viewing guards. And if you're a remote viewer and you try to go into some of this place, they can actually attack your mind and do things to you, probably even turn you into a vegetable if they want to. And that's why I warn remote viewers, you have to be very, very, very careful what you are doing, because they have safeguards in place on this stuff. And I just the other day, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but they declassified a thing the other day on remote viewing with the CIA where they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. That's Indiana Jones stuff. No doubt about it. Why do they need that? Why are they looking for these things? What's going on? I'll tell you this, and this is what disturbs me the most. These guys are playing a power game. And they don't care what they do or how they play that game. And that's really what bothers me.
Well, that was even, Hitler back in the World Wars and stuff was very into the occult and looking for the Ark of the Covenant, the crystal skulls, and all these power religious artifacts and stuff. And I don't know. But interesting. All right.
Well, that's where the Vril comes in. You've heard the Vril and all that. We did a show on that with Jessica the other day. The Vril is a very interesting thing, and it began with seances. It began with spiritualistic movements and all that, and it grew into a thing that the Nazis got a hold of. And a lot of people do not realize this, that a lot of the higher echelon of the Nazi party were deep into Satanistic ceremonies and stuff like that. I think there's one castle in Germany they can take you now. You can go in the basement and still see the remnants of the pentagram on the floor in the basement where the hierarchy of the Nazi party met. These guys were deep into dark stuff. And here's what they were finding, especially with the Glockenbell, the bell that you hear about, and the Glocken. The interesting thing about this, they said they were channeling alien knowledge, alien consciousness from out there. What if it wasn't really alien? What if it was something else appearing to be alien? That's what I always wonder about. And here's another thing we got to remember. According to a lot of ancient books, especially the biblical records and stuff like that, there were forces on this planet, without a doubt, that were feeding us what I call the dark sides. Bad stuff like warfare stuff, a lot of different things to get us to do something. They weren't, put it this way, they weren't giving us stuff because they loved us. Put it that way. They were giving us enough rope to which we would hang ourselves in the end. And I think this dark science is still a factor in this world. It's still ongoing and it's still being used. And there's certain forces, governmental forces, that are in bed with these guys, maybe even married to them.
There's so much, you brought up a good point there. How do we know when people are talking about having connections to extraterrestrials or UFOs or whatever you're talking to? How do you know that that's really what this entity is? When we have conversations in the paranormal and stuff, how do you know that what you're talking to is the ghost of a loved one and not a demon or an interdimensional or a Bigfoot or whatever the heck it is that wants to communicate? It just portrays that aspect to you. So even when you're getting these answers and you think you're getting somewhere, how do you know that that's even where you're at and this thing isn't just pretending to be something else?
Absolutely. When anything contacts your mind, I've had a lot of people tell me this all the time. Oh, Dogman spoke to my mind, or Bigfoot spoke to my mind. I'm going to say, whoa, 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 be very careful there. Because anything that contacts and touches your mind has committed the ultimate invasion of privacy on you, okay, for one thing. And that is a spiritual attack, my friend, no matter which way you look at it. It is a spiritual attack. And this, what you said, is a very valid point. When you contact the other side, who do you know who you're really talking to over there? Okay. I had a woman one time tell me, said, oh, I believe in this because my spirit guide told me this. And I said, well, who is your spirit guide? She said, well, it's my spirit guide. I said, well, how do you know it's your spirit guide? Because my spirit guide told me it was my spirit guide. I said, oh, and you believed it. How gullible can some people be? You got to be very careful when you deal with these things. And here's another thing we got to understand. And I've seen the demonological stuff in all of its many different images and forms. I have encountered it. I've seen these things face to face. I know they are real. I've seen what they can do. I know of people 6 foot under right now put there by these things. This is real stuff. It's nothing. It's not a joke. It's not, a fairy tale. It's the real deal. And these forces can be incredibly deceiving and incredibly intelligent. Think about this a moment. These things have been around for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years for all we know. They have increased their intelligence 9-fold, more than you and I will ever know in a single lifetime. That's what you're going up against when you go up against these guys, okay? You're going up. You're a pea shooter going up against the big guns on a battleship. Okay, it ain't gonna work. It ain't gonna come out good for you if you're not careful. So that's why you have to be very, very incredibly careful when you deal with these kind of forces and know exactly what you're doing. And you better have the good guys backing you up, because if you don't, you're gonna get in some deep, deep trouble. But these guys are incredibly intelligent. Don't sell them down the river. They know what they're doing, and they have the auspices of the world and its knowledge at their fingertips. I guarantee you, without a doubt, as we sit here right now, AI has already been infected by the demonological aspects of all this. Everything we come up with, unless it comes from them, has been infected, has been compromised by these forces. And they're very good at compromising, my friend. That's how they work. They get you to compromise on a spiritual level, and they got you right where they want you. When you start compromising with them, it's my grandmother used to say many years ago, you give the devil an inch and he'll take the whole blasted ruler. And that's the way exactly the demons work. And people who are making deals with these guys, signing dark contracts, selling their soul for whatever it is they want, do not really truly understand what they are doing. If they really understood the real ramifications and the real price that these guys are asking for, they would not do it. They would run as far away as fast as they could from them. But they don't really realize. They can only see the eyes on the prize. They can't see the price behind that prize.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. Yeah. What do you recommend? Like, you've done all the demonology and paranormal and stuff. What do you recommend to people to help protect themselves?
Well, definitely prayer does form, I call like a golden dome over you, a belief in a higher being, a belief in that light system. But we got to understand something. I've had a lot of people ask me that over the years. Says, Dr. Carroll, can I be walking down the street and bam, I get possessed? I said, no, it don't work that way. You got to open the doors in your life to these things. You got to invite them in. Just like the vampire, they can't come in unless you invite them. Okay, that is true. That is a spiritual concept, a law. Okay, and you got to invite them in. But once they're in, they own you. That's it. You know, you done bought the farm. In other words, that's where they got you, exactly where they want you. That's why it's good not to let these black-eyed kids in your house and all this other stuff that's going on out there. That's why they want in. That's why they want to be invited. But yes, vampires are real. I've hunted vampires. I know that they exist. All these things. You know, I'll tell you some of this stuff that's going to be on the back of my next book. When you're a kid, you believe that monsters are real, and then you grow up to find out they really are.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes the monsters are us, having known that. But anyway, the number one rule of monster hunting is the hunter must never become the hunted. And the next rule after that is the monster hunter must never become the hunter. The monster. I'm sorry. The monster hunter must never become the monster. Don't ever want to do that. No. You can do that very quickly if you're not careful. But here's one thing we've got to remember. When you deal with these forces, they are, like I said, they are incredibly intelligent, and they have knowledge that you may not possess. They have a lot of knowledge. We call this preternatural knowledge. Sure, they may know what horse is coming in on the next race, but they're not going to give you that knowledge without a price. You're going to pay a price for it, and it may not be what you want to pay for. They never give you anything for free. That's just the way they work. There's always, you know, you've met people like that. They always get strings attached to whatever they say they're going to give you. That's the way these guys are. Only the strings are ropes or chains. Okay, they're not going to play fair with you. I said this the other day. When you play cards with evil, they always deal under the table. Okay, that's just the way evil works. You can expect that. And I was telling somebody the other day, that's the number one thing, the only good thing about evil. What are you talking about, Dennis? What do you mean there's something good about evil? Yes, there is one good thing about evil. It's predictable. You can, if you study it, you can predict what it's going to do next. Okay, it's so very obvious. But some of this stuff goes back to the Garden of Eden. That's how old it is. But they use it because it still works. Yep.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Man, I could talk to you all day. There's so much. The audience is, you know, very into it. They think that you're an amazing guest, and I agree. There's so much, like I said at the beginning, that we could talk about today, and I'm gonna have to have you back again to continue because let's see, somebody wanted to hear all about the vampires, so we're gonna have to do that as well sometime. But you talked about you got another book coming out. What do you got going on right now? Are you going to be at any conventions? Do you have your podcast to promote? Tell us where we can find more of you.
Yeah, well, I am working on another book right now. It's called Cryptozoology, Hunting Monsters and Things of Nightmare. I'm hoping to get that finished by the end of the year. It should be kind of interesting. And also, yes, I have a podcast. I do 3 podcasts a week. On Monday tonight, as a matter of fact, I have a podcast called The Road Less Traveled. I'm going to be talking about backyard cryptids tonight. And they live in your trees out there sometimes. And Wednesday night at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time is Hunting the Shadows. I'm going to have an all-female Sasquatch squad on Wednesday night, the She-Squatchers. And we'll have some fun with that. And then Friday night, I do Paranormal Point of View. That's where we review books and movies and stuff like that of the paranormal persuasion. And I also have a paranormal consultation service. If you have any kind of paranormal problems, demonology problems, whatever, you can contact me at denniswcarroll.com. And my books are available. I have several books available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Just look up the author Dennis W. Carroll. I have a Patreon, and also membership in Hunting the Shadows Shadow Wolf Club, if anybody wants to join that. And I think that's it for right now.
You are a busy, busy man. Oh man, I appreciate your time, and I'm glad that we got to have you on here today. And we had to start a little later to accommodate scheduling and stuff, and it just was easy to do. So glad that we could make that all work out. So thank you so much for your time, man.
Well, thank you. Yes, sir. And I'll definitely do a return trip. We got a lot more we need to talk about. Absolutely.
Absolutely, man. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and you take care, sir. All right, guys, that is our show for this week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And as I said, like with the green background back here, there's an issue with StreamYard, and that's why I kept getting kicked out on Thursdays. So that's why it's just weird today. So hopefully they're working on it, and we'll get it fixed for the next episode. But that's why. So for anybody interested. But that is our show for this week. So thank you guys all so much for tuning in. And remember to like, subscribe, and share all things here on the Untold Radio Network and Cryptids, Anomalies, and the Paranormal Society. Make sure you head on over and check out all of Dennis's other shows and all the stuff that he's on. He's on so many shows and podcasts. He's on pretty much any topic that you can think of. So head on over and check that all out, and check out the show notes for more. Grab one of his new books. And until next time, guys, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the edge.